Look. This is a conversation to you by Students for Life Ireland. So my name is Serena, and today I will be talking to Cork GP Dr Brendan Crowley about his experiences as a pro-life doctor. So thank you for joining us, Brendan. I'm sure the past couple of months have been very busy for you as a doctor dealing with the COVID pandemic.
Hi, Serena. Yeah, good morning. Delighted to be here. I suppose like everyone else, the last few months kind of turned everything on its head, really. So we responded by doing a lot of virtual consultations, and I suppose the dynamics shifted a little bit. But so hopefully things we're turning the corner nationally now, but we just have to kind of I suppose be cautious, as I say.
Yeah. So firstly, Brendan, during the 2018 abortion referendum, outspoken about your pro-life views and opposition to the proposed abortion regulations. So did you find it difficult to stand out from the crowd being a pro-life doctor and speaking on the issue?
I think, it wasn't easy, but it was something that I wanted to do. I feel that things like this are so important that it's I feel I couldn't be silent on them, and particularly when it became clear that there wasn't too much vocal support in favour of the pro-life position out there, which was a great surprise to me. I think been oblivious to the fact that there was an orchestrated attempt by the government and by other bodies to bring abortion into Ireland, and that this was going on over a long period of time, really much longer than I had been that I had detected. And I think I've always felt very strongly about the humanity of the unborn child and the necessity for us to protect the most vulnerable in our society, whether it be the elderly or whether it be those with disability or those who are in fact the most vulnerable and completely defenseless, the unborn child. And it's something that it didn't really it didn't take too much thought on my part. I think I was fairly oblivious to if there was any any opposing voices or those. I'm sure I didn't make too many friends. Thankfully, I'm not on it, so I think I managed to ignore if there was much going on there. I ignored it, and so I to be honest, I was very proud to be a part of it. I think that it's I saw it as a privilege, really, because you don't get too many opportunities to fight for what you believe in, and I think I'm really overwhelmed by the tide of public opinion that was going in the pro-abortion position, and to me, and it still remains the case, it's completely illogical, not to mind devoid of any real love when you really get down to the bottom of it. But and so when I saw this going on, and I really saw that that there needs to be a presence here. It just it became very, very obvious to me that this was something to do. I think I saw a quote recently from Martin Luther King about, and I suppose it's very relevant now, the Black Lives Matter movement that's going on, and he said that our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And I suppose for me it has a huge resonance, because for those of us who let's say stood out against the crowd, like whilst it might have appeared that we were losing, and this applies to all those who did harder work of going door to door, and the volunteering and really getting the flack, if you like. What might have appeared that we were losing, inside there was a moral victory going on. The impact of that, I think you can never tell the ripple effect of that. And I think, again, because it's you're answerable to your conscience in that sense, that it was just hugely important, and it just it was a no-brainer, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So have you always been pro-life?
I have. Again, it just, for those of us who maybe have held that position all the time, it seems like an obvious one. And the fact that that there is undeniably life beginning at conception, and that until the end of natural life, it just feels intuitive to protect and preserve that natural life. I mean, I think we're all built for connection at the end of the day. And I think this became very obvious during the pandemic, like that you referenced at the start, that it just seemed like, again, the obvious solution to those vulnerable to getting COVID and succumbing to its influence. It made sense for us to make sacrifice as a large population in order to protect this vulnerable group. And like there was a complete disconnect, because these words were coming from Leo Varadkar and Simon Harris, and they were praising the medical profession for doing this work to protect the vulnerable. And I remember talking to a few friends who were let's say who were medical doctors and nurses who stood up during the referendum that time, and like just seeing the disconnect and the public opinion, like obviously at that time, like the exact same thing was going on. Really, we were standing up to protect the most vulnerable, and yet we were vilified for it. So just complete, as I said, disconnect to see like that going on, and to see it coming from public figures who are there to defend, in theory at least, they're there to defend and protect us as people. These opposing viewpoints being expressed in such a short period of time, like hugely frustrating, I felt.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so recently the government released the abortion statistics for 2019, and we were all very shocked to see that there were 6,666 tragic abortions in this country. So has the abortion law affected your practice as a doctor?
Yeah, the figures were, I would say, not unexpected. At least for myself, I think that anyone who believed the lies and the propaganda that was going on during the referendum, that somehow by making abortion legal that we were going to reduce the number of abortions, like was in dreamland. Because I mean it's law-shaped behaviour, something freely accessible and legal and free of charge. Like it only stands to reason that you will increase the number of abortions taking place. And I think like the state's reaction to those in crisis pregnancy is appalling, because they've brought along abortion as their solution, and the clean, tidy solution for all this, and yet they deliberately sought not to find out in the search and in terms of acquiring data as to those who were going to be going for abortion and choosing to have an abortion, what were their reasons for doing that, and by extension, what could we as a country do to prevent abortions. Like there seemed to be, instead of it there being a general recognition that an abortion was a tragedy, that could all sides agree on the fact that in general terms we were here to protect and preserve life, which we're now doing, and it seems like the norm for the pandemic. It seems with abortion that like autonomy trumps all, that it doesn't really matter, and that it should be a case that what you might think it's a bad thing, but I think it's the woman's right to choose this, and she should decide herself. And I think for me it just reflects a society and a government, I suppose, in turn, who really doesn't care enough about us as a people, and that kind of to reach to people and to try and see, are you okay, what can we do to protect us, how can we help you financially, how can we help you socially, like do you need someone to go with you to your antenatal appointments, do you need some clothing, do you all those small but certainly not certainly not insignificant things that women actually need to help them know that it's okay and that they can have a baby. And no doubt about it, those things are harder to orchestrate and to kind of get together. Now, Gianna Care and other organisations are helping with that, which is great. But again, there's no governmental support for these agencies. In fact, they're being termed as rogue agencies. Harrison, it's really puzzling to like that. But yeah, I think that it's something we're definitely we're swimming against the tide with all of this, but it's something that we just have to do.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm a medical student myself, and I know sometimes it can be challenging to be outspoken on the issue and to even sit in certain lectures with a pro-life view. So was this the case for you when you were studying as a medical student?
So I suppose like when I was studying, and I would have studied from 2001 to 2006, it was a very different cultural environment in that naturally the Eighth Amendment protected both mother and child, and there was by extension like the two-patient model of care in obstetrics, like where we cared equally for the mother and the unborn child. It just was the norm, and I think it wasn't really called into question a whole lot, and so as a result, on being pro-life and that kind of thing weren't too outlandish at the time. I think I definitely saw things beginning to change as I was going through college, and certainly afterwards, let's say in GP training, I began to see that there was a push towards a liberalism and a moral relativism in a sense. And I think that one of the myths about moral relativism is that it's value neutral, and that anything goes and it's no problem, and whatever you're having yourself, and as I'm sure you've experienced, and certainly I began to experience as time went on, it's actually the new dogmatism, and it's certainly not value neutral. It's a case of like, get on board or you're going to get vilified, and that's the bottom line. So like, it's kind of like, everyone's opinion is fine as long as it agrees with us, and as long as you're going to go along with the majority. So it's I think the first difficulty or the first challenge for anyone who's in that position is declare and defend their right to have an opinion. And I think that, so there has to be, I think before you can have a reasonable, logical conversation, which, people by and large won't want to have, because you'll actually disentangle their viewpoints pretty quickly, actually. And so the key tool, I think, is to try and combat, that I suppose, the imposing viewpoints that they're trying to bring towards the situation, and to say, well, look, I have a right to have an opinion. And I think that, in fact, if anything, you're imposing your moral relativism on me here. And I find that quite impressive, and I think I have a right to defend. And so, they won't be looking at that. I feel like you're actually judging me here by having an opinion. You're making me out to be a mean person by feeling I want to protect and preserve. So I know that's easier said than done, but I think it's very important, because otherwise it's just mudslinging, and really we don't really go anywhere with that. But I think if we can sit around the table, so to speak, then we can actually start to have a conversation. But we're a bit off that yet, because that same mudslinging is going on at a national level. Like, so you see it yourself. Anyone who brings up anything that isn't in line with the populism that's out there is, it's they're just cast out, and it's terrible to see it. But I think it's just the nature of where we're at the moment, and we see it with the government, that they're more interested, I believe, in doing the right thing. And as a result, to stand out against it requires you to act in line with your conscience, and to stand out against the crowd. And I remember like a quote, it was Einstein had. It was like that the conscience supersedes the authority of the state. And I think that's hugely important when we look at what's going on now, because it's very much a case of like, you fall in line. Otherwise, you're going to hit the wrath of the state. But hugely important to do so.
Yeah. Speaking of conscience, I know probably one of the biggest concerns that you have is freedom of conscience and conscientious objection. So, am I correct in saying that there is, in fact, actually a lot more support for freedom of conscience amongst healthcare workers than the government would have the people think?
Yes, yeah, I think in when the abortion referendum was passed and abortion became legal, the first thing that the government basically tried to do was to make all healthcare professionals fall in line with this, and so to kind of assume that they'd have no issue with falling into line with something which was life ending. And I mean, this was the critical thing, was that we for the very first time, doctors and nurses and all healthcare professionals were being forced to partake in something that was life-ending, and that's hugely significant. But it was, again, because it was so important to the government to get this in line. Anyone who brought that into the public sphere again was vilified because they knew that if we as healthcare professionals stood up against it, that it might be awkward in terms of the implementation and the accessibility and all this kind of thing. But it's a really dangerous time, because like the Medical Council in August of last year, 2019, brought out new guidelines, and the reason they brought out the new guidelines, they said, was to make sure that it existed between the new legislation and the guidelines. And so, like, if you actually tease that out, what they're really saying is that, like, the law has changed and it's now going to align itself with the law, and like that's really potentially damaging, because you look at what's happened in other countries, and look at Germany. What happened when doctors were forced into aligning itself with what the state was deeming as normal behavior and legal and behavior at the time. And so, like, what's happening now, as I said, is that you've got a situation whereby at one part of the legislation, it says that a doctor must be free to make clinical judgments that are best for his or her patient based on evidence-based medicine, and that the medical care must not be used as a tool of the state. And yet, in the same guidelines, they're saying that, well, it is imperative that a doctor is part of the process of an abortion happening. So, like, they're saying that whilst the doctor may not have to perform the abortion, he or she is compelled to be part of the process. He or she must direct the woman towards an abortion, i.e., they must make sure that an abortion happens. And it's really disturbing, because, like, even if you take the ethics aside, and we all know, and it's acknowledged on both sides from a medical side, that abortion is life-ending. We are ending a life, and like the ethics of that, I don't think you can really dispute it. But like that, so that's that side. But even just purely from the point of view of the woman's health, and asking yourself the question clinically, does an abortion, let's say, help them in terms of their mental health and this kind of situation? And like the clear evidence that's out there, when you look at the meta-analysis, i.e. the study of studies, it shows that this is in fact not the case, and that there is evidence that in fact that it can be harmful. And as clinicians, you're tasked with amassing the evidence that's out there, using your own anecdotal clinical experience as well. And you ask yourself, well, okay, if based on all the medical evidence that's out there, and all of my own experience, that I feel that really the best decision for this woman is not to have an abortion, but yet the laws come part of it, like, that's a really dangerous situation where we are, in fact, there is an attempt to force us to be tools of the state. But you're right, there is a lot of support within the medical profession and the healthcare profession for those who wish to not partake in any shape or form with this, and who remain conscientiously committed to both the unborn child and the woman, the pregnant lady. So even I suppose if you look at the data there, there's over 85% of GPs are not taking part in abortions. So like, it's still a very small minority, in fact, that are taking part. But the media reports, you'd be under the impression that every GP was offering abortion. And in any study that's been done, there was one that was done amongst GPs. There was about 1,000 GPs in it. The vast majority with abortion being done in GP, and the conscience was the chief reason for that. There were other practical reasons that were mentioned, but conscience was still, and like, again, it can't be too surprising. Like, these people are medically trained, they've done embryology, they've done obstetrics, they can see the humanity of the unborn child, and so it becomes very obvious that to end that life, is simply wrong. And then, as I said, for the woman, in terms of it being seen as a clinical intervention in isolation, the evidence is very clear that it's not helpful and that it can be harmful. And so it makes sense. But I think when the state are trying to get us to move in a certain direction, certainly very uncomfortable. I feel very uncomfortable with it. But I and many others, are not going to fall in line with that, no matter what the cost would be. And because, again, it's hugely important.
Yeah, exactly. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Brendan. Thank you for sharing your pro-life doctor. So thank you everyone watching from home, and please make sure to subscribe to our channel for upcoming videos. Thank you.